Mr. Speaker, what Kieran so vividly just described to you was a total and utter douchebag of a partner. And it is telling that in that characterization, he did not set up a ban on marrying a douchebag. He did not set up any plan to stop abusive men who hate their wives so much that they would sue them for postnatal depression from being in a relationship with other human beings right now. What we would rather have is that douchebaggery laid clear for everyone involved in that relationship before you go into it, before you put yourself at the risk of that emotional blackmail, before you put yourself in a house with that type of like psychopathic moron. That person has to disclose to you just how much of a douchebag they are by putting a number on it. Tell you how much money they want from you to get postnatal depression. And it should be fairly evident that if that number is higher than 0, you are married a douchebag. He did not engage with Eleanor's extensive material about the deficits in the way in which relationship power is currently allocated, and the advantages of encouraging parties to consider their positions in society according to their legal rights, as opposed to their vulnerability to emotional blackmail. We think under the status quo, financial dependence constrains your position in a relationship right now. The only question is, you don't know how much or in what dynamic. Your capacity to leave a wealthy partner is impaired. Your capacity to be able to regulate the amount of money they give you is currently impaired because of the emotional pressure they have and our inability to compel people to treat their partners in a certain way. What we yield is the capacity for those partners to agree on the way in which they will treat one another, to know what the terms of that agreement are, and to then make an informed choice. And that's one of the other problems with Kieran's characterization. He's saying, no thank you, we are imposing these conditions upon people. No, we are not. People are agreeing to conditions by which to subject themselves in the future. Something that people do all the time. And the interesting point here is that he forgets that when people agree to be bound by those conditions, other people act in reliance upon them. I'm not the party who is going to come out here and defend the right of somebody to make a lot of money and have kids and have their chores done for them by their wife. But we think it's entirely acceptable. If a woman wants to marry a man and she wants to go about a high-powered career, that she places conditions upon what her husband will do for her around the home. We think that is the type of reliance you make when you engage in sacrifices to enable that other person to get that benefit. And we don't think that a woman should have to engage in a man saying, it's not my social responsibility to clean up the dishes. Men don't do that, women do that. It's not enough for people to be able to rely upon that type of social excuse to get around from it. If a woman incurs costs, she engages in sacrifices in reliance upon the promise of somebody else, that person should not be able to walk away from that promise down the track. We think that is an important relationship condition that people should be able to agree upon in advance. The suggestion that people can't leave because of money belies the status quo as it is now. We think if people know that they're not going to have any money, it would be a bad idea for them to agree to a contract in which they would have to pay more money than they currently possess. So the only people who would agree to the dumb contracts that Kieran described are people who do not want to be in that relationship, so who want to be in that relationship no matter what. Because if I agree to pay a condition that I know I cannot pay, by agreeing to that contract I am functionally agreeing to something I could never get out of. And in that circumstance, if you have no money to pay that contract, you'll be declared bankrupt. But that is a very transparent consequence that you would know when you agree to that particular situation. Kieran told you that we must disallow all of these contracts because of coercion in the way in which they're negotiated. What he said was, not that every single one of these contracts will involve coercion. In fact, he almost said the opposite. When he conceived that he could imagine these types of contracts that would have quite high quality consent to them, where people sat down as lawyers, because both women and men can be lawyers, and make the discussion about how they wanted their relationship as lawyers to be regulated, as Al and I often do, with a spreadsheet. So why is it that courts suddenly have just decided that they are unable to distinguish between these types of contracts in this area? What is it about these contracts where courts who currently adjudicate whether or not a contract is unconscionable or unfair or illegal, or had some sort of duress involved because the person had a gun to the other person's head when they signed it, well, that's not their signature on it. Courts engaging in these decisions all the time at the moment, they distinguish between the classes of contracts that are being abused and the class that aren't. Why can't the courts do that in this regard? Like, why don't we just get rid of all contracts if they have a capacity for it to be abused? We think in an overwhelming circumstance, contracts are often abused, which is why the courts deal with them and distinguish between them. What is it about this class of contract that means the court can't distinguish between it? In fact, we think this will be a very clear contract because it will be uniform and done in a lot of circumstances, and people will know what is involved in that, and they will negotiate it, and it will probably be a very awkward discussion that they have, but one that is better to have up front than down the track when you're subject to that emotional blackmail. Kieran told you further that you can't foresee these changes, as though people couldn't foresee that they might not enjoy a job down the track, and that it might impose financial costs to them if they left that job. That's fine. What our policy does is encourage them to think about what those consequences are, and rely upon the doctrine of frustration. So if there is something out of your control and unforeseeable that prevents your capacity to perform a contract, say like a cyclone or postnatal depression, you are not obligated to pay damages associated with that breach. Because Eleanor told you this can be subject to the normal law of contracts, one of which is frustration. Everyone, I can explain that in more detail. So let's work with that. The suggestion that this would in some way force rape is just ludicrous. I said to Elle, they're going to run this, and she goes, no they're not, that would be crazy. This contract does not require specific performance. That is transparent for everyone involved. You would have to pay money associated with that, but you would know that you would have to pay money to that, and you would consent to that reality. Cheers.
Chris, shout as much as you want, but if you know,
it's my matter, you asked the POI.
Chris, let me try to push back here. If you know that you can't have an abortion unless you pay a massive amount, doesn't that lead to a disastrous consequence? You feel compelled to have a child you can't care?
Like, abortions cost money, right? Like, I know that an abortion is going to cost me money when I go to the doctor in that circumstance. Why is it that knowing that the price of abortions is going to go up is like necessarily something that means that I can't agree to that in the first place? All abortions require you to pay the doctor for the abortion service. What we do is tell those women that in the event that they got an abortion, it's going to be like $100 more expensive, right, or something like that. But they're going to know the price of that in the same way as they can look up the price of an abortion right now and know what it is. My substantive material, lol, is that this aids the feminist movement, right? What it does is encourage parties to regulate their social relationship according to their legal rights rather than their social power. This has been a key challenge of the feminist movement, is despite having legal rights afforded to women, men and women continue to ignore those legal rights and conduct their relationships in ways not according to those legal rights. We trick the patriarchy into agreeing to a structure that actually favours women, when it encourages them to view their power in that relationship according to their legal rights. We think this is a great Trojan horse in order in which to convince people to treat women according to the law, and that's why we propose.